Support for CFO Thought Leader comes from Plantful and U.S. Bank.
Certainly. Hi, it's Scott Healy, the CFO of Forterra Corporation. You're listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 1050.
Now the company's developed Gen AI. And so we call it this power of three approach, which is an ability to leverage Gen AI with large language models, which extends the user audience that can actually use the platform and query, but they're using causal and predictive AI components that are, think of it as underneath the covers. And so there's this back and forth of leveraging Gen AI with our causal and predictive AI. And as I said, you don't need to be this power user that knows and loves Dynatrace. You can extend the audiences of people that can leverage the platforms.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Jim Benson, CFO of Dynatrace. One of the key lessons that helped advance Jim Benson down the CFO path was one in clarity and focus. During his tenure as an FP&A leader for the customer service division of Compaq, eager to influence how the division's performance was presented, Benson dedicated himself to crafting detailed reports and narratives. However, each time the general manager of the division accepted Benson's carefully prepared materials, they would be distilled down, creating a narrative with only a few essential points. Sometimes Benson's points would vanish altogether. At first, Benson found the process frustrating, but in the months ahead, he would grasp the value of simplicity and focus when it came to conveying complex financial information to large audiences. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. Jim Benson joins us after this. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Plantful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Plantful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Plantful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Plantful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Plantful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to plantful.com/CFO Thought Leader to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Plantful. Hello, we're speaking to Jim Benson, CFO of Dynatrace. Jim, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Jim, we got excited when we saw your interesting long tenure at HP. Always interesting to understand better some of these cultures, some of these environments that finance leadership discovered their skills and talents. So we look forward to having you look back for us. And I get to open up by just saying, what comes to mind for you when you think about those real experiences that prepared you for this role? What would those be?
So I think what I would say is breadth and depth. My recommendation for people, and this happened to me in my career, and I would say that there's a little bit of luck, also a little bit of good choices, where I started my career out looking for a varied set of experiences. And so I joined a financial management program. Lots of companies had them. I ultimately chose the technology sector because that appealed to me. And I probably didn't know this going in, but having varied experiences really is something that I built on throughout my career. And so you start with the financial management program and you go through a diverse set of roles. I did 3 one-year assignments. in different areas of the company. I learned different things. And then I continued to expand upon that. And so my career path has been very much one of building breadth and depth. And what I mean by that is sometimes you have people that very early in their career, they're looking for progression, and progression to them is a promotion. I would say in order to become really a seasoned executive, what you really need is experiences. And so one of the things that I learned, and I learned this from having very good mentors. And the mentors were not always mentors from the finance profession. The mentors were also folks that were my business leaders. And so the set of experiences that I built was a continued learn new areas, whether it be finance, could be accounting. I did a stint in internal audit. I learned different roles, manufacturing, services, divisions. And as you continue to build, you have frames of reference to be able to apply business challenges to, whatever the business challenges you have, different experiences to. So I would say for me, that was really something that I have built out in my career. I would like to say it was on purpose. Sometimes it was making good decisions. So I think making good decisions does matter. And I progressed and did that. And I had a bit of a mantra that I was content to stay in a company as long as I was valued, as long as I was getting diverse experiences, and as long as I was continuing to learn, grow, and develop. So ultimately in my career, I did ultimately leave. I had a very long career at HP. And I aspired to be the CFO, which is the lonely position. And I ultimately chose to go to Akamai Technologies because they were looking for someone that had big company experiences, but actually understood that you needed to have very small company execution orientation, because not everyone that works at a big company can actually segue down to a smaller company. At the time, I think Akamai was a little under $1 billion in revenue and needed to build out the infrastructure for the company, both operationally and financially. So that appealed to me. It's something I like to do. I did that. There's a lot of stories we can talk about in my career when I was at Akamai. And then recently, within the last 2 years, I came to Dynatrace. Dynatrace had a similar story as Akamai, which is one that I really, really enjoyed, which is a company growing rapidly in a fantastic market segment, but going through the proverbial growing pains. And what does that mean to continue to grow at the rates that we were growing at? What do you need to change? What do you need to change in the company infrastructure? What do you need to change in the financial infrastructure? So it's been a story of building breadth and depth. So I would say I very much think like a general manager. So I am very operational. My orientation is when people talk to me, they say, geez, you sound like the sales leader, or you sound like the marketing leader, or you sound like a COO. You don't sound as much like a CFO. And I really believe that's advice that I would give people. You need to know the business. You need to be adaptable. You need to build strong relationships. And I think that's what really good CFOs do.
Let me ask you to springboard off of that. Is that something that was true the first 10 years of your career? Again, you got a lot of operational experience along the way, but I'm wondering if maybe at the start you were a little more financially focused, or were you always sort of a broader thinker in that respect?
It probably, I would say, Jack, honestly, it was probably, I developed it over time. Certainly the early roles that I took, you're young in your career and you're either doing some level of deep financial analysis on something. But I think the program that I was part of was very good about ensuring that you had 3 very diverse experiences. And I would say what really was a catalyst for me in my career was the third assignment that I had when I was in this financial management program was an internal audit assignment. And sometimes you think of internal audit as this very control-oriented function where they're doing compliance reviews. At the time, the company did both compliance reviews and operational reviews. So I actually stayed in that capacity. And if you think about it, I had 3 experiences, but within internal audit, I probably had, because I think I stayed in that role for maybe 2 or 3 years, I probably went through, Jack, 15 engagements. And these are 15 engagements in very specific different areas of the company. And so while I wasn't deep in those areas, I got a familiarity with a lot of different areas. And I certainly, again, I continue to, when I talk to people, they talk about their career as one, build breadth, build depth, because what ends up happening is when you try to focus too much on progression, you find that you're at a point in your career where maybe you're at a reasonably senior level. It's tough to pivot laterally because you don't have experiences that people want in order for you to continue to grow and progress if you ultimately want to be and aspire to be the CFO.
I was just looking at some of the titles that you had at HP, and I'd just like to share them again. Titles don't reveal all that much, but they sound like traditional finance titles. Of course, Director of Financial Planning and Analysis for the Worldwide Customer Service Division. You were a Group Controller for the Compaq Global Services. You were Vice President, Finance and CFO of the Worldwide Customer Support Division, and you were the VP of Finance and CFO, America's Technology Solutions Group. And so these are someone who's really risen through the ranks. That's the second 10 years. Those are the titles of the first 10 years. There were many, many different titles. The one that caught my eye, of course, Compaq. That was a significant deal back in the day. You're the controller. You're brought into this. Were you also, involved in the M&A area at the time, or were you after the fact? You got assigned?
Yeah, I would say it was more after the fact. Obviously the acquisition occurred, and if you go back in time, back then it was the largest acquisition in the IT industry. You're talking about two huge companies coming together. So I would say I had a wonderful set of experiences just because of that. You're integrating two companies, and when you think about all the work that needed to do around, you're harmonizing accounting practices, you're building out financial planning disciplines, you're delivering to cost synergy goals, you're developing them. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to align things to maybe build out some forward momentum in the business. And so that certainly was a huge experience, wonderful learning experience. I'd like to say, hey, I chose to do that. Sometimes, as I said, in life, you get lucky, and I was in a good position, and it was an opportunity to work with a tremendous number of people across varied functions. And I just think that you need to, in your career, you need to capitalize on opportunities like that, Jack. You just do.
Yeah, and just to give the time frame, in 2001, 2002, roughly, you were the group controller there. This is a story, just for some perspective, as you have already highlighted, that just dominated the business tech headlines for all of 2 or 3 years. The integration went into such detail, and you were there at the front lines, which is just a really historic chapter in some ways for the PC industry and forward. So thank you for that. One other thing, one of the skill sets that you acquired, and many finance leaders do, of course, is the storytelling ability. And I'm just wondering if you could look back in time for us. Was there a time where you were tapped on the shoulder and asked to step into a particular meeting because your report or the person you reported to understood you could tell it better than most, or understood the dynamics and could, again, explain them better than some? How did you emerge, and when was it, apparent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I would say that when I think back, it probably was, I think it was the role that I was in at the time. I was actually the FP&A leader for the customer service division at Compaq. And the general manager there was just a tremendous storyteller. And so we had to prepare materials for him. And I remember, as the FP&A leader, you're building a narrative for him to use. And I remember that it frustrated me as a finance leader that you would work very hard to prepare a set of materials and a narrative, and I would provide it to him. And he was very, he's still a friend to this day. He was very nice about it, but he would take my materials and then he would basically build his own narrative from that. And it frustrated me, Jack, that because I wanted my materials to be the materials that ultimately he leveraged, and that was the story. And after multiple iterations, of going through this. As you can imagine, every quarter is a storytelling quarter. And at the time, we were a spotlight for the company's earnings. And so ultimately, that narrative got built into the company earnings process. And so after maybe 2 or 3, it's like I was just determined to make sure that my ability to prepare the narrative and the story was one that this general manager would actually, there wouldn't be a lot of editing, wouldn't be a lot of requirement. It probably took 3 or 4, Jack, but ultimately I learned a lot, one, from that experience, and 2, from someone that was really good at distilling information down into very simple narratives. He never had more than 2 or 3 data points that he was trying to highlight. He ensured that there was a kind of a core, message that he was trying to tell with some modest build-outs. And so he was very much a summary story. And you can obviously build upon that when you're doing a Q&A, but it's very important to crystallize things. And what do you want the audience to take away? There's always a business context, but let's face it, in the earnings world, there needs to be some financial orientation to it. So you can build out maybe a growth narrative, you can build out maybe the business narrative or a margin narrative, but it needs to have an underpinning of reality with data. And so I learned to couple those two together through that set of experiences. And then I'd say from there, it was just something that it became a skill that I was particularly good at.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Great insight for us. Also, your final, and you mentioned moving on to Akamai. I just have to ask, was there a recruiter involved when the time came? Was it through your network? And again, after a 20-year investment here, we know this was a thoughtful move. Was it a recruiter? Was it a network? What ultimately?
So I ultimately landed at Akamai through a recruiter. However, the story is a little bit longer than that. The story is that you're right. I was at HP for a long time, and HP had a wonderful succession planning process. And certainly I did well at HP, and so I was high in the broader CFO succession planning network. But I live in the Boston area. HP is on the West Coast, and so all roads lead to the West Coast. So for me, the next assignment that was required for me to really continue to build out further at HP was going to require a move. And I think and people listening to this podcast know, you end up having professional, personal moments. And my children were at an age that I did not want to move to the West Coast. And so it was just an opportunity for me to reflect and say, you know what? I've built a tremendous set of experiences in a very large company with just a very diverse background. And I said, I think I'm ready for a CFO role. I was fortunate that I had 3 legs of the CFO stool. I had a very strong FP&A business finance orientation. I had built out this controllership orientation. I would say the investor relations narrative, which is a kind of the third leg, was something that I was more on the input side. So, but because it was something that I was reasonably good at anyways, I knew that was something that I could position. And so I wanted to go to a company that was headquartered in the East Coast. I wanted to go to a company that was growing rapidly and that was relevant and that it was in a really exciting space. And I got fortunate that at the same time that I was interested, that a recruiter called and said, hey, would you be willing to talk to? And interestingly enough, the journey that Akamai was on, that was a company that was growing 30%, very, very wonderful, profitable profile, but was in the proverbial, they were a one-product company looking to become a multi-product company. And they knew that they needed to extend into adjacent areas. And they needed to have someone that built out more of the operational and financial plumbing for the company because that was not in place. And so it was a match for them and for me. And I would say it was probably the best experience that I've had in my career, to be very frank, that I was very fortunate in going there. Wonderful people, a wonderful company. And that's probably not something that we've talked about, Jack, that we'll maybe talk about later, that people, like when I look at my career, I measure my career more with the people that I grew and developed. And so I've been fortunate to work for people that helped me in my career grow and develop. And I'd like to think that I've done that for others. And that happened again at Akamai. It happened with people at HP as well. So it's, when you think about your career, sometimes you do need to make moves like that. That move to Akamai was an opportunity for me to become the CFO of a publicly traded company where I geographically wanted to be, with a set of challenges that I was kind of interested in helping them with on the journey.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And we'll move on to find out about Dynatrace. Now, I should mention, though, at Akamai, you were there 11 years, another big investment comparatively these days. That's another block of time for you. Of those, eight of those 11 years were as CFO and executive vice president. You then open a new chapter, a CFO chapter at Dynatrace. And I'd just like to first have you tell us about this company, and then we'll ask you what is the chapter, though, that you're opening here. But tell us about Dynatrace. What is this company about today? What are its offerings?
So Dynatrace is a company that obviously my career has always been in technology. So another technology company. And what Dynatrace does is it's in what's called the observability segment. And the simplest way to think about that is that when people have applications and they have different workloads, these workloads need to be monitored. So think of it as you're monitoring your workloads and you're trying to determine if there are problems with the workload. It could be an application issue, could be an infrastructure issue, a server issue. And what they do is they have software that identifies where pain points might exist, and it helps you remediate them. And you think about that, so that's called in the infrastructure software space. So what Dynatrace does is they have, before AI was even vogue, it is an AI-driven platform that can specifically identify where pain points are in software, to identify where the issues are, and then tell you how do you go remediate them. And so when you think about today's world, with all sorts of workloads moving into these public cloud environments, whether they be AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or even private networks, that you're moving workloads and you're moving data that is exploding into this very complex environment. And there is a need to have telemetry that can identify and ensure that workloads for end users, the end user experience for companies, is up and running. And so this is a B2B company. It's about $1 billion, $1.5 billion, a little bit more in revenue, growing rapidly, very profitable. So it was a similar story, Jack, to my journey when I went to Akamai. So they're headquartered in the Boston area. Ultimately, their roots are actually Austria, and so interestingly enough, that's where the technology was developed. The story of their journey is very similar, that it is a company that is looking to grow and extend its platform into new and adjacent areas. So it reminds me a lot of the movie that I saw at Akamai. And so being able to apply some of those learnings, and let's face it, you learn some things work well, some things don't work well, to the Dynatrace story. So I've been here now about 2 years and couldn't be happier.
So again, as you explained, over $1 billion in revenue, went public maybe 5 years ago. 2 years ago, you arrived. Do you think there was part of the story that wasn't being told effectively? Did you, again, apply your storytelling skills and maybe it was internally, maybe there was some part of the organization you thought needed to understand better the bigger picture and where we're headed. I don't know, but what part of the story do you think you've helped expose over this first 2 years?
So it's a good question. I think that Dynatrace has always done a good job of telling the story. And the challenge I think the company had was it is a segment that not everyone is familiar with, in the investor market. Because when you generally think about infrastructure software, that is this obtuse area sometimes for people. And I would say it was a new emerging growing category. There were certainly players that were already in the space that were more known. So I think the company did a reasonably good job of storytelling. I would say the storytelling that I've had to evolve for the company is the company started out as an application performance monitoring company. So I mentioned that you observe workloads and you identify where there are pain points. The company's focused on providing observability for applications, and applications are different than, say, an infrastructure. The infrastructure being maybe what is the health of your environment from a server perspective? What is the health of your environment from a capacity perspective, storage perspective? That Dynatrace started with applications, and then they extended into new areas, infrastructure monitoring. They extended into security. And so there was a need to evolve the story, that the company was becoming more than just a one product, one segment oriented company. The company was a platform company, and the platform story of showing that you were gaining traction in adjacent areas was an important story to tell for investors, because investors were looking for, again, they were looking for breadth. What are you doing? How is this platform leveraged? So when they look at the broader target market and the addressable market, that we were going after a bigger piece of the pie, and we could show proof points along the way. And one of the things that the company's always done a very good job with investors is it's been a story of balanced growth and profitability. Jack, this is before profitability was cool in the software space. As you well know, it was not that many years ago where it was growth at all costs. And that ultimately was how software companies were valued and measured. Dynatrace has always been a company that has been disciplined. It's been a rule of 40 plus company since going IPO 5 years ago that you mentioned. And so that was one of the things that I would say is a reason why I did come. It's a very disciplined company. And this balance of growth and profitability, I think, is one that rules the day for any software company long term.
We have to imagine that AI is now something you're being asked about by the investors, what is the AI chapter here? And when we hear the words observability and monitoring, it's kind of easy to understand how AI might be able to assist you in this area. But tell us something about how AI has become part of the story.
So it's interesting that, obviously AI has become front and center over the last 18 months with Gen AI. So people talk about AI as if AI and Gen AI are the only types of AI. That Dynatrace has had AI in its platform that they've been helping customers with for 10 years. So it's been over a decade. And the AI that the company had previously was what was called causal AI. So think of it as it could have the diagnostics of your entire environment. Think of it as a map. And it could do correlations around if-then statements when something was going to break. And so causal AI was a key component of the platform. We sell to enterprise customers. And so it was needed with the enterprise customers. They can't have bodies of people chasing alerts because that is not a productive way to address alerts. So causal AI was a key component of the platform. And this notion of predictive AI, which is looking at different attributes and knowing from experience using AI that if these things happen, then you're going to have an outage. And so you could actually prevent outages by doing correlations. So causal AI and predictive AI were always key components of the platform. Now the company's developed Gen AI. And so we call it this power of three approach, which is an ability to leverage Gen AI with large language models, which extends the user audience that can actually use the platform and query, but they're using causal and predictive AI components that are, think of it as underneath the covers. And so there's this back and forth of leveraging Gen AI with our causal and predictive AI. And as I said, you don't need to be this power user that knows and loves Dynatrace. You can extend the audiences of people that can leverage the platform. So we're early in this journey, not early in the AI journey, but early in the journey of this power of three approach. And so we're pretty excited about it because it is a growth opportunity for the company to get the more people we can get accessing the platform, the more consumption you get on the platform, the more consumption, the broader set of businesses, and the better value proposition for customers.
So again, Gen AI will enlarge the audience that can use the platform. To me, that means that it empowers these people who perhaps don't have the grasp of all the details or the tech knowledge, but have simple questions. Gen AI, they can prompt to ask questions that in the past required a specialist. How am I doing? Am I close to?
You are 100% spot on. That's exactly what it can do. That otherwise, you're leveraging people that are power users. They know how to do query languages that they're leveraging to try to diagnose issues. That you can extend your audience, whether it be IT operations, it could be developers, it could be executives, could have a dashboard. You could type in, I want to know how my application in XYZ is performing. Gen AI can help you in the development of that. And it can use the characteristics of what Dynatrace has under the hood around monitoring. And so that's important because if you think about triaging problems, one of the problems that large enterprise customers have, which is why Dynatrace performs so well, is these are large companies with many, many, many people. When there are outages and when there are issues, and there will be because software does not work perfectly, that you need teams of people to be able to have a common set of, like a common answer. Today, there are a varied number of monitoring tools that are in these companies. And when you have issues, very difficult for teams to talk across one consistent platform. The benefit of our solution is it allows you to bring these groups together with a common set of data and an easier tool set to identify and communicate across your teams.
Nice. Thank you for that. Hey, Jim, we're always looking for a metric or a number that within this CFO chapter, within this organization, has sort of been highlighted more. It has you've perhaps have played an active role in exposing it, or maybe it was a member of your team who brought it to your attention and said, "You're right. We need to educate the organization why they need to study this more closely." And it could be any one a scenario, but sort of a tale of a metric. Anything come to mind? A particular number or metric that you realized needed to be discussed differently or put in a different light? Or
Yeah, I would say that that metric is consumption by capability areas. So historically, the company has been a very engineering and sales oriented. Engineering in the sense of building out new capabilities, and sales. And the sales model was a pretty simple sales model, which was go find an application owner, do a proof of concept. Dynatrace wins in many cases, and then you land and then you expand. And the expansion was mostly in application-oriented workloads. So people would add more applications. They'd start with a few, then they'd add a few more. And so the company wasn't really looking at, hey, we're building out new product areas, outside of core application performance monitoring. And so there was a need for the finance team to bring, how are we performing against the varied set of metrics? How many customers do we have that are leveraging, that X number of products, 2, 3, 4, 5, because ultimately we were able to do some forensics on this. That's not going to surprise you that the more products that the customers used, the more value you're providing, the more revenue you were yielding from them. And so there was a need to go deeper on the product capabilities. And so that is something I'd say we're continuing to refine. And so there's lots of, as you can imagine, cohort analysis that you're doing, new logos, existing customers. How are they behaving? Do they behave differently? There is something new that Dynatrace has inserted, Jack, when I joined, which is the company used to sell SKUs, so SKUs. It was, you bought a finite number of licenses for our varied products. And as you probably know, with the hyperscalers, that kind of a model that platform companies are using, and many platform companies, is you're buying access to the platform. And so we introduced this contracting vehicle called the Dynatrace platform subscription. So think of it as you're not buying a set of SKUs anymore. You're getting access to the platform with a full rate card for all of the capabilities, and you're doing it for a price and a term. So call it $1 million for a year, $3 million for 3 years, and you get access to the platform. You commit to more dollars, get a better unit price. Commit to less dollars, higher unit price. What it does is it provides an ability for the customer to have a frictionless experience, that they don't need to continue to go back to a sales rep with, hey, I want to try your application security product. I didn't buy it at the time of renewal. I bought your application performance product. And so there's been a journey that we've been sharing with investors with our progress around getting customers to leverage this contracting vehicle, because the benefit of this vehicle is they consume faster, they have more capabilities that they leverage, and ultimately investors are simple people. That means you're going to do an early expansion. That means you're going to be able to have an upsell, and therefore upsell will lead to more revenue for the company. And so it's been a journey, and I'd say we've had some really good proof points of success in the last 18 months.
Well, nice. Thank you for that. We are up to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And this is where we look to just have you identify one moment of strategic insight during your long career. Might have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, might have happened last week. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
I'd say probably the strategic moment for me, and I've had probably multiple ones, but probably one that's more recent, meaning within the last 10 years, was the strategic moment was when I was at Akamai. And it was a need to help the company in its evolution, and actually help investors in the evolution. I'll give you the characteristic of where the business was. Business was performing very well, but as happens in the technology sector in many cases, that you had slowing growth in, call it, your core offering. And there was a need for us to extend. And the extensions at the time that we were thinking about were pretty, I would say, very adjacent extensions of how we could leverage the Akamai platform. And for those people that don't know what Akamai does, that basically it's a content delivery network that speeds up performance of applications and websites and web content. And the strategic moment was we realized that there wasn't enough juice in those areas to really extend the growth of the platform to the level that we thought. So the new use case that I had to help with the CEO was pivoting into a brand new area. And the area we pivoted into was security. It was a big bet, Jack. No, we were not known in the security space. And so it required us to do more in the way of corporate development. That was not something we had done. So the strategic moment was we were doing things to fix growth operationally and organically. There was a need to now extend and leverage M&A in a more pervasive way. We acquired a security company. It was a bit of a reverse acquisition. The reverse acquisition, we retained all of those leaders. Those leaders became the security leaders for the company. And the rest of it is history, where, from not having a security business, that I think the security business today for Akamai is probably 40% of their revenues. And so it has been a catalyst for kind of reacceleration and pivoting into a brand new area. And, everything I said, I didn't talk to you about a financial metric, but it was leveraging financial skills, we did some forensics on the market. We did forensics and we then realized that there is a need to now leverage, because let's face it, there is organic builds, there's inorganic builds. And there was a need for us to do both. We needed to develop some muscle memory on the M&A side. And so I'd say that was probably a big one in my career, and that I'm proud of.
Are you tired of manual, fragmented, and time-consuming expense management processes? Then the U.S. Bank Commercial Rewards Card might be right for your business. More than just a card, it's an all-in-one card, expense, and travel management solution that replaces outdated expense management methods with a single intuitive platform. Specifically designed to scale with your growing business, it provides the control and real-time insights into spend that you need. It integrates with your existing tools, lets you set custom spend policies, captures all expenses automatically, and liability is kept at the corporate level. Employees can even book travel right in the platform. You also get to choose your rewards, either points or rebates, all while saving money with no annual fee. So why wait? Manage your cash flow better and streamline your business operations today with the U.S. Bank Commercial Rewards Card. Visit usbank.com/CFO to learn more. Jim, we're going to move to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We want you to think back, and it would have been at Akamai that you moved into the CFO role for the first time. And again, not unlike many CFOs, you joined the organization in a very senior role, finance role, and within a few years, you step into the CFO office, which is something we see frequently. You're sort of more like an interim sometimes CFO. But when you finally step into the office and that first 60 days we're wondering about, is there something that occurred to you about the role, something that you were a little surprised by? Like, oh, is this part of this? Can you think about yourself back in time? And
Yeah, so it's I would say I can. And I remember it like it was yesterday. So even though I had been in the company a couple of years, we talked earlier in the podcast about investor relations and storytelling. You have to remember that I was always the provider of the storytelling for data and maybe framing. I was not the person that had to deliver the storytelling. So it's very different when you are in I provide the context and the narrative, to I am delivering the context and the narrative. And I remember, even though I had been in the company 2 years and knew the company pretty well, I'll tell you the funny story. The funny story was I was named the CFO. And so I had never been previously, other than an observer, I had never been to an investor conference. I had gone with the prior CFO and the CEO before, became the CFO. And it was I think I was in the role like maybe 2 weeks, Jack. And we're at an investor conference, and we wake up in the morning, getting ready at breakfast for the day to start. And I'm with the CEO, and he is sick as a dog. And he said, Jim, I actually can't participate today. He said, you're going to have to do it. And do it was engage with investors for the first time. There was an investor presentation that I hadn't even seen that I needed to deliver. So this was your proverbial baptism by fire. And it was a bit scary, I'll be honest, that it was a bit scary, but so I was thrust into it. And so you can imagine the adrenaline flowing. And so that was kind of a key component where it certainly wasn't by design. But I would say that experience ratcheted up my learning curve in a very, very pervasive way. I realized that, I was not perfect the first time I did it. I was self-critical and self-aware of, all right, I need to kind of refine this area and that area. But I remember it like it was yesterday. It was not something that, even though I was in the company, that was an area of the narrative. Again, I talked about the three-legged stool. I was thrust into a need to perform in an area of the stool that I was still developing in. And then from there, I guess the rest is history. So,
Yeah. Jim, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side with us. You shared with us you're in the Boston area, had family, didn't want to move to other parts of the world. But tell us something about yourself that maybe your Dynatrace colleagues might not know about you. Something many folks might not know.
I'll tell you that for my career, Jack, that one of the things is I always try to ensure I inflect a bit of personalism into my job. So there's always a bit of personal, professional engagement. And so I say people know me reasonably well on both a personal level and a professional level. So I actually can't, come up with something that I said they don't know about me. They certainly know that I have 3 children. I'm an avid golfer. That so they know all of those aspects about me. They know a bit of my journey. I'm a mentor to people. So I'm not sure there's anything deep that they don't know.
There must have been, let me ask you about just your 20 years. And I always sort of pop this question to those who have long tenures such as that with any one company. There must have been one time a recruiter came and almost got you to step out of the HP large enterprise earlier. Maybe it was 10 years in, I don't know. But no, you stuck with it. And, clearly you're someone you're very thoughtful about this. But was there a time where it was close? And why was it close?
I'd say there were, and it's probably like anyone that goes through the recruiting process that recruiters are good about reaching out, and that in many cases you either say you're not interested politely, and so that was pretty much most of my career. And you go through moments in your career, Jack, maybe where you're at a low, where a recruiter finds you, where maybe you were dealing with something.
Yeah.
And I do recall there was a time in HP's history where we were going through some difficult restructuring at the time. So there's some large restructuring activity, both for the business and for the finance organization, that I always like to work on things that were areas to help grow and accelerate the business. And I felt that, I was spending a lot of my time on a restructuring. And so that was a moment in my career that I did kind of listen and got pretty far. And I'd say I didn't pull the trigger, and I didn't pull the trigger, Jack, because when I did reflect, I've had some mantras in my career. I was very highly valued. And that was important to me personally and professionally. I was being paid well. And I was learning, and I was growing, and I was developing. And so I looked at that and I said, is this role that I'm looking at, one, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. Was this role going to really enhance my experiences? Was this company, was the market that they were in that differentiated, that was worthy of, let's face it, CFOs tend to be conservative by nature. I weighed it all and I said, you know what, I'm better off staying. And I think ultimately the decision when I made to leave was the right one, which was a company that I knew going in was a CFO role. It was effectively an interim CFO role, to be honest. So the roles that I had before that were not interesting enough on the development side that were worthy of kind of pulling the trigger.
Just a comment just about the Boston area. We know that it has sort of a robust CFO networking environment, because for someone who was 20 years within HP, you would think, and you step out of that, you didn't have all the networking relationships that some people might have if they had job hopped quite a bit, or you had a lot inside HP, no doubt. But so was that helpful, that community up there? Or, do you ever think about that? You might have been another part of the country that didn't have all of what I think the Boston area might have.
So
Am I overstating that?
No, you're actually not. I would say that my network outside of, call it HP, and call it the people that had left HP.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a pretty pervasive network now.
Yeah.
You can think about it. But at the time, you're right. I was not as well known in the Boston area or outside of HP. One of the things I did, Jack, which was probably the best decision, was I joined a CFO roundtable. And
Yeah.
this CFO roundtable was local area CFOs that got brought together every quarter for a day. And it was this orchestrated process. So I got to meet people.
Right.
One of the things we haven't talked about is the CFO role can be a lonely role because within the company, you know, you report to the CEO, but at the end of the day, the decisions you're making on the financial side of things are on that's you and you
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
The benefit of this CFO roundtable that I participated in was it was a bit of group therapy to some extent. Well, you're not sharing anything that is confidential.
Yeah.
You are sharing stories. You are trying to learn from one another. Hey, I'm
Right.
dealing with this particular set of issues. Have you dealt with this? What have you done? Uh, that was really the way the program was set up. So it allowed me to meet a lot of local area folks. These folks have become friends to this day. When I
Yeah.
left Akamai and my successor came on board, I made sure that he also, because interestingly enough, he had only been at Akamai. And so he as well needed to broaden his
Right.
network. And so he
Yeah.
equally went to this CFO network. And I think I would certainly recommend that to anyone in a CFO role. It's important to have people you can bounce ideas off of. So I'd say regardless of the role, if you are a CFO, I think these are important things to do.
Right. Well, quickly, we wanted to ask if you have a book recommendation for us, and it doesn't have to be a business book. Maybe it's something you escaped with. I don't know, but something that challenged you in some way or left an impression.
Fiction reader than a nonfiction reader. And when I do read things that are on the business side, I probably like to read things that are more condensed and that they are more practical. There's a few books that I've read that I thought were pretty good. So Jeffrey Moore used to be on the board of Akamai. And so I've read several of Jeffrey's books. And what I find about Jeffrey's books, Crossing the Chasm happened to be a big one, talking about the whole technology disruption area, from innovators to kind of early adopters to people that extend later. And so I've read several of Jeffrey's books. What I like about Jeffrey's books is that, one, they're short. Two, they're a reasonably easy read. Sometimes I'd say business books can, and by the way, then it's not CFO oriented. And I don't know if you need CFO oriented books, to be very frank, but a lot of times you're trying to deal with kind of business related issues, where what's happening in a technology life cycle, how have others dealt with it? And if you've developed a set of financial skills, you can then try to apply that to maybe these business. So I'd say some Jeffrey Moore books I found to be helpful. I say another one that I read a long time ago, which was more experiential, and it was more when I was at HP, because some books are better depending upon the company you're in. When you're a really large company, they have different issues than smaller companies. So I remember at the time I read the Jack Welch book. I think it was Straight from the Gut.
Right.
It was an oldie but a goodie. At the time, so one of the big things that Jack talked about were just very practical things that they had done, and they leveraged a lot of benchmarking, and they looked at their various business divisions around their performance, and they obviously aspired to be, at that point in time, 1, 2, or 3 in all the target markets and industries that they were in. I found that helpful when I was at HP to apply similar lessons to the businesses that I was in leveraging benchmarking around how others were doing, how others were performing, as a way of catalyzing and learning and driving the organization forward.
Wow, great. Thank you for that. We're up to our final question. Sorry I asked you a few extra, Jim. We're running a little late, but finally, we'd like to know what your priorities are for the coming 12 months as a CFO. What would those priorities be?
So probably the biggest priority is alignment. And you kind of say, well, what does that exactly mean? That, as you can imagine, companies, especially, in Dynatrace's journey, there is a need to align all the functions in a very integrated way. I use the phrase, the ropes have to touch the ground, which means you need to be able to integrate operationally all these businesses to drive a better outcome. So a big thing my finance team is working on is working across these functions. We have mission critical goals and ensuring we have alignment and leading indicators, Jack. Like, what are the leading indicators that we are looking at that will drive us to hit these particular goals? So alignment is a very big one. The company is a growth company. So these are all things that tend to be oriented around growth. Because obviously we are a growth and leverage company. There's other areas that we're looking at. How do we drive better leverage in the company? Are there areas of G&A that we can try to get more efficiency in? It's funny, we brought up AI. We are, call it, early in the AI journey. There's an opportunity for AI to drive more productivity. We're still in the phase, I'd say, of learning before applying necessarily. So that is another particular area that we're focusing on. The financial discipline in the company is good. So the need for alignment is really an important one for the company. There's a bunch of other smaller initiatives, but I'd encapsulate it with alignment as being kind of the top. And, I'd say probably another is the company is very geographically oriented on our finance team. And we're looking at areas, how do we develop global standards? Global standards can then allow us to look at global practices that can maybe be, where does work need to be done? Making decisions around it.
Jim Benson, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everyone. Jack here. Hope you've been enjoying our recent episodes of CFO Thought Leader. Please know that I don't take for granted this opportunity to serve you. Your time is valuable, and of course, so is the time of our CFO guests. I'll admit to you, on certain weeks, I will pinch myself and say, hey, I get to do this for a living. I speak to all these impressive leaders. Undoubtedly, there are more aggressive interviewers out there, some who leave no stone unturned. But our swim lane is for finance leaders only. And those finance leaders have a unique style of leadership, one that is rooted in the burden of trust. In light of this, finance leaders must take great care not to forfeit this trust as they step into the role of being a more expressive leader. And that is what CFO Thought Leader is really about. That's why I try to remind myself week in, week out, how fortunate I am. Still, I need your help. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Email me your comments at jack@cfothoughtleader.com. And please visit cfothoughtleader.com. You'll find a listener survey right on the nav bar. As always, thank you for listening.